his career, and he reached out to me after our first meeting and said, you know, he invited me to lunch, which I was like, oh, that's so kind. Like, this guy barely knows me. He invited me to lunch, and he offered, if I recall correctly, I don't think I've forced my, but he offered to provide some assistance, you know, be a sounding board and that sort of thing. And that's when I started to realize, oh, this is what mentorship sort of looks like. And I think from that I realized, oh, there are other people that I want to be my mentors. And so I would do this kind of sneaky thing where I invite people to lunch and just kind of like get to know them and what have you. And then I wouldn't ask them on the first date because that's a little rude. But then I would either after that or on the next one say, you know, I thought about it and I decided that we agree that you should be my mentor. Or something. and that would catch people off guard and go, okay, well, you know, I don't know if this is how I well, you ended up in, so sorry. It was close. So you got corroboration here. And so, I know, like, sneaky, I should have never accepted that second email. Yeah, so then I would just kind of talk to them about what I was needing and hoping that they could actually offer to me, and you know, if they were willing. It didn't always work, just so we're clear. Some people were like, sorry, I got too much going on. You seem like a nice person. Good luck.
And so Mike Ryan, as you're aware, still very much involved.
Absolutely.
He's on a panel up in Sacramento.
Oh, cool.
Now he's out building companies that use technology to help service the healthcare industry and underserved populations. So he's done very well. So you were self-aware enough that you had some gaps in what you needed. You sought out the individuals who you felt could sort of fill those gaps for you or help you along the way. When you think of today what someone should expect from a mentor, what framework would you give them? Someone to guide the career, someone to help through a specific sort of transaction or career move?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say it varies, actually. There are some sort of standard mentor relationships, and I actually would caution people not to have too many mentors because it's a relationship. It really is. And even if it's just a matter of you checking with somebody once a quarter or twice every other month or something like that, it should be work. You should actually think about what you're trying to get from that person and set them up to actually be able to provide that for you. So if you're trying to do that with too many different people, I feel like it's actually going to be diluted and it won't be a fun experience for you or for them, to be perfectly honest. And then secondarily, I'd say on the other side that if you are being a mentor for somebody, to take that seriously, and that sort of frustrates a lot of folks, and I understand it, because I've had the misfortune, I would say, sometimes of having to respectfully decline a request for somebody to ask me to mentor them, and it's only because I do take it so seriously. But I'd say at the core that's the type of thing, the type of relationship that you should actually sort of frame in a, obviously, the ACAG has some really good guidelines for a mentor-mentee relationship. You know, there's a code of silence in the sense that, or cone of silence, where someone's going to give you advice, and sometimes that advice might be in some ways divulging some trade secrets or something about their organization. You're going to need to talk to them candidly about what's going on. They may know some of the people that you're talking to, because this industry is small, and so you have to be ready to first and foremost honor that, and then the commitment, right? So if someone says we're going to talk on a certain day or we're going to talk twice a month, and as a mentee, I think it's your responsibility to kind of take control of that relationship and make sure it happens and it's as easy as possible for the mentor, that you honor that as well. And so there are a couple of principles. The last thing I say is if someone can't be your mentor because of bandwidth, like don't take that personally. It really is I think it's that they're being honest about that. But it also doesn't preclude you from still, and I've had people sneakier than I am do this with me when I say, I can't do that, and they say, well, I respect that, can I still just reach out to you every now and then? And I go, sure, and I'm happy to do that, understanding that there are bandwidth challenges. And then there are just some people who are just really crafty and they catch you at the right times, and you realize, you know what, I'm talking to you like every month, so maybe this is a mentor relationship. Like, yeah, pretty much it is. Yeah, so sometimes that happens too.
That's excellent. Okay, excellent. So we at California Association of Healthcare Leaders have broken the mentorship framework down into full-time sort of mentorship and coaching transactions. So we've been offering, so for people in the audience, it's also on our website, people that you can reach out to and say, I'm interviewing next week. I haven't interviewed in 5 years. Can someone do a mock interview for me? And then sort of taken that and put it into little chunks along the way. If it falls out, then that's fine.
Yeah.
So that's our plug for CAHL. So I'd like to just have a little discussion about management tools.
Okay.
So everyone generally has some form of framework. Some people adopt formal frameworks. I personally use the John Maxwell. There's the CAHL approach. I was up, unable to sleep on the road not too long ago and saw Tony Robbins in the middle of the night. And I'm kind of like, now I get it.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. It's like I was up before 3.
Yeah.
For that. So do you have a model that you've used or a couple that you've adopted over time?
Interesting. Sadly, no. I'm a little too lazy to understand the depths of someone's model that well. I guess that's not entirely true. Sometimes I have adopted. So there was a whole servant leadership phase. I don't know if it's still a thing now, but that resonated with me personally. I do have a sense that leadership is really. I don't want to get zealous about this in terms of like calling or anything, but I do think it's a accountability that you have for people who have done with. There's a guy who does a lot of sessions, leadership sessions for ACHE. His name is what can I say? I see Tom Atchison. So he wrote leadership and followership and other stuff. And I did a training with him, and he talked about in one of his books. He talks about it too. He says leadership is recognizing, or followership is that where people have voluntarily subjugated their own right for self-determination to follow your lead, and they do that because they feel like you can get them somewhere. You can get them and the team somewhere collectively that they can't get to themselves. And so the obligation of the leader is to honor that, right? And that means you have to understand what people's goals are, and a lot of that is understanding how their goals are congruent with, or in some cases incongruent with, the direction of the organization. But also, so making sure that you align those things and make them work, but also honoring that other part, which is, everybody's not completely wanting to just follow the path that the organization goes. They want to support the organization through the context of their own lens of what they aspire to in their career. And some of that means that you have to help people grow and develop so that they can provide greater value to the organization, and or if that match becomes incongruent, help people to chart a path that helps them to self-actualize out beyond the organization. So I think as a leader, you can't be selfish and think, oh, I got these great people, I have to hold on to them because they make me look good and everything else is great, and that is important. But at the same time, if they're seeing some need for their career that this current role is not filling, and you don't have the flexibility or bandwidth, even being creative to actually meet those needs for them, then I think a good leader recognizes that and supports someone's growth. And quite honestly, for me, that model has worked well, because usually when that happens, people who could replace those individuals and come behind them are just as good, if not better, because they see that you have a track record for helping launching people's career path. And if they're, upwardly mobile or motivated to provide a great value, then they see you as a conduit to enhance that, not just stifle that. So that's pretty much it. And then everything else I just figure out as it goes along.
Yeah. So we're, I don't know, after the last board meeting, but I think Tom is scheduled to come out in March.
Oh, really?
But we're sponsoring him to come out for a face-to-face event here.
You all, have any of you done sessions with Tom Atchison? If you haven't, you're cheating yourself. Like, you should go. I haven't gone in like maybe two or 3 years, but there was a time where like every year at Congress, if he was teaching something, I was there. Because not only is he really brilliant and really insightful, but he's also ridiculously funny. And so that always is a good match for me, I think, entertaining and educational, that match. And so he's coming. Well done. Great treat. If you can make it, I encourage you to go. I think it'd be great.
So along the way, I assumed that you've been put through the battery of psychological testing that we put CEOs and C-suite individuals through. And it's always a question that comes up, especially when I'm working with mid to late careers, of how important are these? How serious do I take them? And then two-part question.
Mm-hmm.
So any reflections or comments on that? And now today, as a CEO, what do you hope to gain from those tools if you use them in your recruitment process?
So great question. So yeah, I didn't, at the time I was working at San Francisco General, I didn't know a lot about the career batteries, other than kind of being in the professional settings where I hear people talk about them, but I hadn't done any of them. Even in Myers-Briggs, I hadn't done anything like that. And so the first time I did it, I was kind of like, oh, this is so cheesy, right? And so it's kind of, it felt weird even answering their questions because I felt like it was kind of loaded, but I was answering them and hoping that I get some insight from them. So I've done now that one, something called the Pyro B and some other ones. But I have found that they are pretty good. What I found is it's reinforcing in terms of knowing who you are, and you evolve in your career too. Your different experiences, different learnings, you kind of pull those into your repertoire tool shed, and they really do kind of shape how you view the world. The biggest thing for me that comes from all those things, particularly in doing them in teams, is it helps me to learn about other people. And through learning about other people, you also even learn more about yourself. It's kind of like when you take a foreign language, you learn to appreciate the English language better, meaning not that you think English is better, but you understand aspects of grammar and language that you don't understand if you're just speaking your native tongue. And I think when you're doing a personality profile, if you do that with a team, you sort of realize, oh, everyone doesn't think like you, everyone doesn't approach work like you, and many times, some of our biases are, these people are nuts. Like, why is it that she doesn't get it? Why is it that they don't do this? Why don't they speak up? They must not be intelligent, that sort of thing. And you're like, oh, no, this is just how people process information. So when you're working with a team and you have people who have different personality traits or attributes, you actually learn how to engage them and how to get the best out of them, and also how to be the best sort of leader to them. So I think that when I go through those things, particularly again now, I'm in this situation. Early on, I was doing it as a part of my own career development, and it was often outside of my own sort of managerial context. Now, being at sort of this level in my career, I usually do it with myself and like my team, and so we have an opportunity to kind of dissect that as individuals, but also as a collective whole, and try to use it as a way to guide and frame how we interact to get the most out of the team.
So it's not just about the recruiting and replacement, but the ongoing style.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think absolutely.
So let me ask a few more questions, and then we'll open up for audience participation. So can you tell us a little bit about Joy Street Design?
This is a plug for my wife. Did she ask you that? Yes. So my wife is an interior designer. She actually, you heard me earlier say she went to law school, so some of you brought us for her. You're like, I see an interior designer. Maybe not. Maybe you just focus. You look very like firm. He's like, are you talking to me? No, I was talking to the guy behind you with the blue tie. How are you? Sorry, I didn't mean to call you out, but I thought that was interesting, your facial expression. My wife went to law school. She practiced law for a while, and one day she came home and she said, I figured out what I want to do with my life, which I was like, I thought we did this. And, but no, she hadn't. She was not. She was a little jaded with her legal career. And so she hadn't figured out what she wanted to do, but she figured out that it wasn't in the law. So much of learning what you want to do is also knowing what you don't want to do. So I've been on this journey with her. But she took interior design classes, and then at one point she made the leap. And Joy Street was the street we lived on in San Francisco, and she started a design company, and it happened there. And so I think we may dispute who came up with the name, but I came up with the name. I encouraged her to name the company Joy Street Design. So that was the company she started and has been running successfully for a number of years.
And so there's one kitchen design on there that I'm just like, I want that kitchen.
Oh, really? Okay, well, talk to me afterwards.
So
my daughter's going to kindergarten to see what I need some help. No, I'm just
so the reason I bring this up, couple fold. One, I had a sense there was a career shift, just like there was in your career. So hence your starting point is a start in a journey at the end of the journey. Plus, you may want to let the audience know you also have a certificate in law from Duke.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I, as part of my graduate training, which is in public policy, Duke had an interdisciplinary program in health law, or healthcare management law and policy. And so I took classes in the business school and law school. I don't have a legal degree. It's a trend in my career where I don't actually get the training, but I get to do the work. But I haven't practiced in the law. And if any of you want legal advice, don't call me. That would be bad for you. I'm just telling you. Oh, you wanted me to say more about? Oh, no, that's pretty much it. I was
sorry that my mind drew. So,
nice
how important has law been in your practice as a CEO today? How, not necessarily from the legal perspective, but just from context framework.
Yeah, very. I would say. I used to say early on that one of my philosophies in life was I only wanted to wear orange by choice. So I have an orange tie, and that's pretty much the extent of the orange that I wanted to wear. And I wear stripes occasionally too, but not that much. So I've led a career, or I think an approach to my career that I try my best to know where the boundaries are, because one thing I learned in my training, and my wife reminds me, is ignorance of the law is not a defense. So you actually have to know what certain laws are, and actually getting your ACHE fellowship, which I hope many of you have done or are on the journey to do. Healthcare law is one of the competencies for which you have to have sufficient proficiency in. So law has been good to kind of understand from a policy perspective how laws and regulations are made, so you can kind of follow things and not get overly excited when something is starting too early on, but also not to miss the opportunities to influence things as they move forward on a local, state, or federal level. Law has been important to make sure that as those laws are then passed and implemented, that you understand that whole implementing process, where it applies to your organization, and can translate that to people who are counting on you to actually help to execute and keep the organization on the right side of the law. And then finally, to know where you're outside of your element and your area of expertise, and that you need some help. And so knowing how to pick up the phone and call either your compliance officer or your general counsel to say, here's something that feels a little sticky, and I need the benefit of your knowledge, and recognizing that their roles are sort of uniquely positioned to protect the organization. So when you have some really creative idea, their first impression might be to say stop, and so it feels like, why would I do that? Because that's going to be the quickest path to no. But you should. I think as a leader, it's often important to realize also it gives you the perspective to check the guidance that you get from people with legal and compliance expertise to say, are you telling me this because there's actually a legal impediment to this, or this is your opinion? Because often opinions are infused in these. If someone says, legally you're fine, but from a business practice, I think it's questionable. It's a bad idea. I don't say ignore that, but I say put that in its context. So that means that you might need to think about how you tweak it and refine it so that whatever they're pointing out to you, which is probably good advice that something's not quite right, actually doesn't mean that it's a no. It's an absolute no, and those two things are really distinct.
Interesting dinner time conversation with your daughter starting to pick up the law.
No, my wife doesn't talk about the law that much, so and I only do a little bit when she allows me. But my daughter's favorite word for a while, which is kind of funny for a 4-year-old, this is when she was 3, was actually. And I couldn't understand that, because we'd be talking about something and then she would find ways to correct me. She'd go, well, actually, and it didn't even matter to me what came after that, because I was like, actually, you're 3. So, so whatever you're about to say, maybe you're right, chances are you're wrong, but that didn't stop her, so she got that from her mom. I know how legal that is, but it's certainly self-assured.
Last question before we open up. So, so there are many careers out today, especially mid-careers, who are struggling in a very, very competitive marketplace to find that job, figure out what they want to do in healthcare. Any quick advice to them that comes to mind?
Yeah. Can I steal something you just said to me earlier? Yeah. Can I do that? You permission to steal something? Thank you, Joe.
Well, in that case, go ahead.
So the piece of advice, is I think understanding your worth, and your worth obviously evolves as your career evolves, as you invest in yourself and you're learning from on the job as you sort of advance within your career, but also how you invest in yourself. So participating in organizations like ACHE, getting education, contributing, I always like to say, so my plug for living in David and the team. You get so much more out of things like this when you actually roll up your sleeves and get involved. You get a lot by just participating in this way, so don't get me wrong, that's great. But you get even more in terms of depths of relationships you build, practical experiences that you can layer onto the day-to-day experiences you get in your roles, your roles that actually do enhance the value that you provide to an organization. So whether you are currently in a role where you're seeking to continue to grow, or you're in a transition, or you're about to be in a transition, knowing your worth, in my mind, and it may vary for you, and this is a direct part of our conversation. Now it's private, I don't want to share too much of that, but it is that knowing your worth involves actually doing a self-assessment and being self-aware, and really stepping back and saying, what is it that I am good at? What is it that I feel like I'm pretty confident? What is it that I'm continuing to grow at, and I have some deficits, and what is it that I'm completely in the dark on, and I need to start to explore that part of me, if that is what a skill that I need for a role that I need, and that part is important too. It's not just a matter of developing skills and getting tools just because, right? It feels good, and you have 20 letters behind your name. Like I've seen people with the whole alphabet behind their name. I'm like, that's really impressive. It also scares me. I'm like, wow, where did you find all that time to do all that stuff? And is that because you're indecisive, or you just like education? You got a lot of money? I don't know. So I think really knowing your worth and taking stock of that as a tool for figuring out what you want to do and what you're capable of doing is very important wherever you are in your career.
That's rock solid advice. I think that's great. Okay, questions from the audience.
Did you have a question? No, he's giving you to pass around. You don't have to have a question.
I have so many.
No.
Is this actually on?
Yeah, it is. We hear you.
Good acoustics.
Thank you, Dave.
So thank you, Dave, and thank you, Delvecchio. I mean, this is inspiring. I've known you for a while. I realize now I was tricked into being a mentor. And, one of the things I wanted to say on that topic is paying it forward is something that is kind of important. It's an investment that comes back. So I encourage and really support you if you're accepting those invitations going forward. Now, the question that I have is, when it comes to the legal advice or having your own thoughts, have you discovered in terms of seeking that advice from legal counsel or compliance officers, risk officers, whether or not the opportunity exists to ask them, okay, tell me what I cannot do. Please guide me on how I can accomplish what I want to accomplish. And if so, can you tell us a story about where that plays into the equation?
It's a great question. I'm trying to think of an actual experience that's substantive. So I think let me talk generically, and then maybe I'll come up with something that's substantive that I can share. So I think generically, what advice I've heard from a lot of general counsels I've had the pleasure of working with is, if you have a really good general counsel, the earlier you involve him or her into what you're trying to work on, the better, because they're not feeling behind the gun. What I've learned from attorneys in the business world, oftentimes people think attorneys really are, and risk officers are to shut you down, to make sure you don't do anything, right? So because their job is predicated on organization safe, but they really don't enjoy being the know people. They like being a part of the creative process too, and so if you involve them in that early on, they can help to say, here's the guidepost. I will do the background for you to figure out where the guidepost is. Tell me what it is you're trying to do, and and then I can say, well, here's some options. You can go in this direction, and then you can kind of bounce ideas off each other about, well, will that be to actually get you to the destination you want to go, or is that really know where you're trying to go really is not a good place to go, and so I'm clear that I'm not trying to change your mind and suggest to you that this is a bait and switch, you can get to where you're going to go. No, I actually am trying to keep you from going there, but I'm not saying that you have to stay where you are, that there are other paths to getting to an end that you might be trying to achieve that's just slightly different than what it is that you're trying to affect. So, I'll tell you one example I had early on in my career. Actually, this is a funny story, and Jillian may know a little bit about it because we used to work at CNC together. One day I got a call from my wife when she was still working at a law firm, and she said, "Hey, do you know you're being sued?" And I was like, "Wait, what? I'm being sued?" And I'm like, "And wait, how do you know I'm being sued?" Right? Like, who calls their spouse in the middle of the day saying you're being sued? So there was a partner in her law firm, actually it was a partner of counsel or something, who happened to be looking something up through one of those law databases or something, and came up on this case that had just been filed in court in San Francisco, and I was one of the named plaintiffs. And I was like, "Wait, what?" Or named defendants. And so that's how I figured out that at the time, and this is on public now, so it's okay, at the time at Sutter, we were trying to divest the infusion business that we were having, so we were selling it to DaVita. And there were a group of patients who were not particularly, and community members who were not particularly enamored with that idea. And they had been working with us to try to get the organization not to move in that direction, and eventually decided that they wanted to take legal action. And so they sued the organization, and because I was the executive responsible for executing the plan, I was one of the named defendants. And so that kind of caught me off guard, and there were some choice things that I wanted to do as a result of that in terms of like seeking my own counsel and taking some other sort of actions to protect myself, and working with the organization's counsel. We were able to proceed with the plan. We had already been working to take the community's concerns into consideration, but we were able to proceed in a way that did do all of that successfully, and eventually the lawsuit was dropped, and we didn't actually have to we didn't have to go to court, and I wasn't dragged before the public in some weird display that would have had me at least looking like a worse person than I really am. So this is one sort of example of working with counsel. In that case, counsel had been involved in this deal very early on, so it wasn't something that caught them off guard either. Because usually, if that happens, it's also a bad thing because they feel like they're catching up, and that damages the relationship too. So
great advice, good example, and good learnings for all of us.
Yeah.
If I may, Joe, just before I hand you the mic back, I'd like to acknowledge something for all of the mentees and mentors in the room. To have someone of this stature publicly acknowledge you just shows the level of character and humility that he has as a leader and as an individual. More importantly, the opportunity for me to sit here and humbly see where that little big nugget of advice and counsel or mentorship that might have been dropped somewhere along the line, where it has in any small way contributed to your success and your station, is the most humbling experience in the world.
well, thank you, sir.
Question?
Mind if I go?
Go.
Can you introduce yourself for me and others in the room?
Just maybe is this working?
Yeah.
So my name is Eric Johnson. I work for Quest Diagnostics, a laboratory corporation. During your career, have you taken any lateral moves, and how do you evaluate those in terms of, I guess, future growth context?
It's a great question, Eric. Lateral moves. Yes, I have. Well, sort of, I'm going to call it quasi-lateral. So when early on in my career, I worked for UCSF. I did medical practice management at San Francisco General. So I worked for the School of Medicine, but at San Francisco General. My first job was running a hematology and oncology practice. The working title for the job was division administrator. It was a small group. It had actually sort of just broken off of another larger group. It's the HIV/AIDS division of the organization. My first promotional opportunity was to manage another division. So it wasn't moving up to the director level. So it was a quasi-lateral, but it was adding that onto my portfolio. So I didn't leave the current thing I had. And then after that, so I took on 2 divisions. That happened after my first year. after my second year, I was asked to let go of both of those divisions and run this larger division. So they were lateral in terms of working title within the career track within the organization. It had some sort of promotional bend to it. So it was like going from analyst 2 to analyst 3 to analyst 4. And I realized, like, you know, that was kind of cool and sexy within the UCSF world, like people who knew about it. It was cool, but when I put it on my resume, people were like, it still says analyst. What is this 2, 3, 4 thing? So I was just like, you know what, division administrator. That's all of them were called division administrators. So for all intents and purposes, it was lateral. It was the same type of work, just for a larger swath of the organization. I say that lateral moves they have their value. You actually, just like with any other thing, I think lateral or promotional or, you know, a higher successor role, or even a step back, I should say, because that often does happen in people's career. You just have to take stock of where you are at the time, what you're trying to do, and the likelihood of that opportunity getting you there. So it's all about having a plan. And if that fits within your plan, or you can amend your plan so that it fits, just make sure you're always working a plan and not just kind of going through the motions. So I think that's really important. And I say that latter part because life is life. And like you all heard, you know, I had a graduate, undergraduate degree from Emory, a graduate degree from Duke, African-American man. I thought, you know what, I might be okay. And I couldn't find a job, you know. And so I had to humble myself very early on to say that means a hill of beans. It's all about what value you provide to the organization and to the people who are paying you, basically. Are you giving that back to them? And so I know that happened to me somewhat early in my career, but that happens to many people middle term of your career or later in your career. And I've had the opportunity to advise people to say, you know, people who've been at COO levels of organizations and they can't find another COO role. It's like, well, would it really look bad on my resume if I took a step back and became a director somewhere else? And you know, I say you have to weigh the pros and cons. It may look bad if you take a step back to be a director, but also maybe look bad if you're out of the market for 2 or 3 years. So you have to take reality into perspective, and so long as you're providing value and you can make that case, I think you can bounce back from anything if it is a bounce back, or I think you can bounce forward to something else if you've really taken stock of what you can provide and then actually delivering on that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. That's excellent.
You guys are so polite. No, you go.
Okay.
We have 2 mics.
Okay. So, before I came here,
Introduce yourself.
my name is Erin. So
Hi,
my name
Erin.
is Erin Robinson. I'm a grad student at East Bay Healthcare Administration program.
Hi.
And hi. And so I did a little research on you and said that you initially wanted to be a doctor.
Yes.
Yeah. So I just wanted to know, because I kind of toyed with the idea too, but I think I'm going to go back and do nursing.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and possibly get my master's in nursing, as opposed to becoming a nurse practitioner.
Okay.
So I'm just thinking, what made you make that turn to be want to be an administrator
Versus a practicing physician.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll answer your question. I for the sake of the group, like, can I say I know I'm not calling you out. We talked about this earlier, so I didn't want to kind of waste their time. But can I tell you the answer later?
Sure.
Okay, I'll gladly do that. Hold me to it. But I also want to put in a plug. There's some nurse leaders in our organization who are in the room today, and I know they'd be very happy to offer you any sort of guidance if you want to think about how your career path from being a nurse to a nurse leader could be informed. So I want to offer a plug there. And there are probably other nurses in the room too. So take the opportunity to network with them as well. I think that'd be very good for your career.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And I'll remember, hold me to it. I'll answer your question.
Okay.
Okay.
Hey, Zachary, you're up.
Greetings and thank you. My name is Zachary Weaver. I'm a private permanent here in California for the health plan.
I know it's on. You have this thing where you have to speak into it. There you go. Let's try. Yeah, there you go. See, it works. There you go, Zachary.
So thank you. My name is Zachary Weaver. I'm here with private permanent.
You gotta keep it close.
Downtown.
There you go.
Here we go. So first, thank you for coming out this morning and sharing with them. My question comes to mentorship as well as sponsors.
Okay.
So you have mentors sometimes as a personal relationship. As might not have that personal relationship, but I'm going to put my credibility up for you based upon what has been presented. So if that has happened, can you speak to that?
Wow. So that's a great question, Zachary. A point of clarification before I answer your question. When you say sponsor, in your mind, is that limited to someone within your organization, or could it be someone outside of your organization as well?
It can be both.
It could be both. Okay, cool. So I don't know that I've had the distinction, but I will. Maybe this is what I'll tell you this story, and then maybe this would be what you're getting at. When I worked for Sutter, so well, I can talk about why I went to Sutter later. But when I went to Sutter, I was only there. I was there less than 2 years. So I was really concerned, career-wise, whether leaving Sutter was actually going to be bad for me on balance. But I was leaving because I got a call from the guy who would become my boss, who had been my boss of sorts before. I didn't report directly to him. He ran the public health department for all of San Francisco, and he had taken a role to run it for all of Los Angeles. They gave me a call one day and said, "Are you ready to be a CEO?" And I thought, one, I asked him, was he joking? But two, when he said, of course not, he effectively guided my path into my first CEO role, which is at Harvard UCLA down in Los Angeles. And it was because he had worked with me before. This is his version of it. He saw the value that I offered to the organization, saw that I was aligned sort of philosophically, mission with the organization, and that he thought that was those sort of skills and attributes would be of value for this role that he was trying to fill. And he pretty much helped to usher me in. I remember asking him at the time, well, I'd like to think about it. Can you send me a position description so I can kind of look at it and get all the stats and really think about, how this is going to work for my career? And he effectively said, I don't have all of that because I don't want to go through all of that. I am calling you to see if you want to take the job. I think you will make it through the application process well. But if you turn me down, then I'll have to do all that stuff. And so this is effectively someone saying, I know what I want. I think you fit the bill. I'm going to guide you through the process to get you there. But you have to do it yourself still. It's not a slam dunk. You could mess this up, but I don't think you will. So that was kind of like vouching for me and really got me past. I don't know if that's what you mean. Yeah. Okay. All right. So yes, I did have it, and I felt very blessed to have it. I don't know how many people have that type of.
So I think what we're going to do is go ahead and just pass the mic to someone else when you're done.
You go ahead. Yeah.
I'm Maya Williams. Actually, I work for at a hospital.
Yes.
In the health system. In healthcare, there's been a move to change culture, be it safety, quality, improving patient engagement.
Mm-hmm.
Even as a physician,
Mm-hmm.
there's a change in training.
Mm-hmm.
CAHL is actually opening their own med school to actually, have physicians come out with different culture.
Mm-hmm.
As a young leader physician who enters an organization and you come into your own department and you say, okay, well, there's a movement culture in the whole nation that we haven't really met that culture,
Mm-hmm.
and you want to establish that culture, and you want to influence, people around you. How, as a CEO, macro level, my question is, how do you approach your managers
Mm-hmm.
without being accusatory, without bringing their autonomy to help improve this culture?
Yes.
And then how do you challenge them to then take that and trickle it down to the front line?
To the rest of the people. Yeah, great question, Lana. So there's a skill that I learned about early on in my career journey called implied authority. Right, so there is direct authority when you're in a leadership role that you're accountable for certain things. So you're accountable for managing this budget, you're accountable for managing the HR, you're accountable for managing the facilities or the space, and making sure that you meet the goals of the organization. Sometimes you don't have those accountabilities, or you don't have enough of them to be the person who's the decision maker for what happens in an organization. The question I think you're asking is, if you don't have those and you have a motivation for wanting to advance what you think are the imperatives of the organization, how do you do that without ruffling feathers, if you will? So I'll say, I think one approach to doing it is trying to go to whoever the person or people are who have those responsibilities and just asking them what their philosophy is or what their thoughts are about these sorts of things, to see if there's a reason for you not seeing what it is that you think is missing. So it could be that they actually aren't aligned with you, and if they aren't aligned with you, I'd say that's not a death knell. You can actually ask to see if that is, if there's an ability to influence that decision or to influence that perspective, so that then you have an opportunity to work with that individual who has the accountability to do so. But it also is a data point that you should keep in mind, because it could be that person, if that person reflects the will and the perception of the organization, that organization is not the right organization for you. But if they don't, and you think there's an opportunity to influence that, then I'd say, one, if you find through that innocent conversation inquiry that there is an opportunity to help somebody. So, they agree with you, they don't feel like they have enough bandwidth to do it, and you say, can I help with it? Is this something I can partner with you to do? And it's not intimidating or threatening, it's actually a force multiplier for them. You'll find that sometimes people are like, be my guest, right? Like, I'm happy to have you help with it. What do you need to be able to do it? I absolutely have to make sure you get the work that it is that you're required to get done. Then I have to be careful about, in our labor environment, that I don't put responsibilities on you that violate, any sort of covenants that we have between a union that represents your role or not. But if those things aren't the case, or they don't become inherent barriers to it, then I think you can actually find the space and the opportunity to be successful in enabling change and fostering change in ways that will be beneficial to the organization. I think also, finding if there are like-minded people amongst your colleagues and your peers who also agree. Oftentimes managers don't, sometimes they get maligned, right? Particularly middle management is really, really hard. Not that executive management isn't, let me be clear about that, but middle management really is, because you don't have all the authority that you need to execute, and you sometimes don't have all the resources that you need, or you feel you need to execute. And so when people who work with you understand that, and they don't use that to kind of say, well, you're inept or you're inadequate, how can I partner with you to make sure that our unit, our department is doing well? Those things can go over really well sometimes. But I'll also be honest that sometimes they won't, because there are some people who, quite honestly, don't do well in these roles, and or they're mismatched for the organization. And so you have some assessments to make about whether that person is an outlier and whether you sense that the organization, you can work around and through those people, and sometimes ruffling the feathers might not be such a bad thing to do, because it may get your attention and it may call attention to something that warrants attention. I want to encourage you to be a troublemaker of sorts, and certainly because you work for Allegheny Health System, I want to make sure that that's not the case. But I do think that you shouldn't suffer silently. If you think that there are parts of the organization that are not moving in a direction that the organization wants to move in, then it's incumbent on people like you to at least bring attention to that, and then try to work within your capacity to be an agent of change.
So I think we have three or four more questions that we're up to. One in the back, and then we'll leave.
Good morning.
Hi, good morning. Jasmine Coran. I'm from the Campus Health Network.
Hi.
Hi. I used to report to Belgique. Tell me you said hello.
Okay.
Miss him dearly.
Oh, we love him.
I know. We did too. So good morning. Thank you so much for having this event. This is great. Perfect timing for my life. One of my questions, you talk a lot about the challenges that you've had throughout your career. You didn't really touch too much on any personal challenges and how you strike that balance. How are you an effective leader and then still have personal issues that are maybe going on, the death of a parent, a personal lawsuit filed against you, something along those lines.
Yeah.
How have you overcame those challenges, and what advice do you have for people who are going through similar situations?
Wow, Jasmine. Is it Jasmine or Yasmin or?
Jasmine.
Jasmine. Yeah, thank you.
Spelled like Jasmine.
It's spelled like Jasmine, but pronounced Jasmine. Gotcha. That's clear enough. thank you for the question. I saw a few heads nodding as you were speaking, so we were having a little church for a minute. Life, right? You're asking like what happens when life. There was a quote that I learned early on. I forgot who said it, but it was life is what happens when you're making plans. Right? So like you can have the best plans you can make, but life is going to happen, and you really have to figure out what you're going to do with that. I'll say I have, from the perspective of sitting here and offering you advice, I want to be honest with you. I've done, I think, okay in some of those contexts, and not so okay in other contexts. I think my wife wouldn't mind me sharing, just as an example. I sort of joked about when she was starting her career, but it was a pretty significant move for her to have taken this legal education, working at one of the top law firms in the country, to figure out that I want to take this leap and become an entrepreneur because I'm not happy, I'm not feeling fulfilled in the work that I'm doing. And quite honestly, for me, it was kind of a wake up call too, because we had planned this life that was kind of she had been for a good part of our career the chief breadwinner, so it was kind of a scene where I had to take stock of what was happening in my career and in our life, and say that life is very short, and it goes by really quickly, and you are well advised to try to get as much of it out as you can, and to give as much as you can in the process. And I had been fortunate to figure out a career that I was actually feeling fulfilled in, that it was going to work. I had desires to, when I went to public policy school, I thought I was going to become an elected official. And as soon as I started working and seeing what it takes to be in the politics, I was like, oh, dear, I can't do that. And so and I don't want to do that. So I to respond to your question, I figured out that I was being fulfilled, and my wife wasn't being fully fulfilled. And so we had to make the decision that this calculus she's going to take a step back, sort of earnings-wise, it would impact the family, but in terms of fulfillment and joy that you bring to life, we can work through all these other things. And so I share her story as a byproduct of kind of realizing that this was going to change our lives entirely, and that was okay. That we just needed to kind of know as much as we could going into it, and then just be prepared for the ride. So when things happen, we've had situations like deaths of relatives and in-laws that have been setbacks for us as well. And like I said, sometimes we've done well with that, and sometimes not so well. But through it all, you just figure out what are the learnings that you've gotten from that, and how will you apply that to the next circumstance that comes in situations like this. And the poignant question you ask, how do you pass it along to people to say it's okay? You're not the only one who's going through things like that. But the negative advice that I would offer you, particularly from situations where I've seen people who I thought had really bright professional careers and been derailed when things like that happen, is it's really, really important that when things like that aren't happening, you provide as much value as you can so people recognize your worth. And then two, when you are going through that you, as much as possible, share that with your allies, share that with people in your organization who have the capacity to create a space for you to go through those things and not be jeopardized. Because what I've seen, unfortunately, is occasionally this has happened, where people try to shield their organization from what's going on when they're not bringing their full self to the organization. And then it shows up and people don't have the context for what's going on, and it ends up reflecting poorly on you. And you don't have the ability to bounce back from that in some cases. So not, you don't want to broadcast your business to the world, but you want to take those leaders, particularly your direct supervisor, if you've cultivated that relationship, and say, I'm going through something right now. It's impacting me. I'm going to try to work through this, but I need you to tell me if it's really impacting the organization in ways that I need to consider, how I step back, how I talk to HR, how I get employee assistance to get through a situation where I can get to the other side of this and bring my whole self to my role. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay.
What I love from that is be proactive.
Be proactive. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Two or three more questions up here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lillian Chan. I'm the co-chair with David of the Bay Area Local Program Council and supporting Joe in putting on programs like this. So thank you all for attending today, and thank you, Delvecchio, for a great conversation. I first learned how to be a good LPC chair through Delvecchio, who was one of my chairs. So my question I'm looking at a lot of the positions that are out there at a director and C-suite level, and a lot of them seem to be going to people with clinical backgrounds, like a nurse or a physician leader, and there seems to be some moves throughout the country that nurse executives, physician executives are able to get those C-suite roles, and generalists seem to be not as successful. So I'd like to hear from you what your thoughts about how that trajectory is going, and do you see the same, are you observing the same thing, and what can a generalist, someone who's maybe has a background as an MHA or an MPP or something like that, such as your background, how can we compete on that kind of trend?
Wow, that's interesting. Can I just ask by show of hands, are others seeing similar trends? Really? Okay, great. So thank you for sharing that. I'll share context from kind of earlier on in my career, things that I saw that are similar, but also then for now, kind of at least my lens, which is I'm being educated right now. But I'll share that early on in my career, and perhaps this is what you're talking about as well. Particularly working in public settings, so working with the state, meaning UC's system, or for academic medical centers, and well, actually a little bit there, but also in public context. Sometimes there are other competing factors for the ability for managers to actually get roles approved. And some of those roles, say for example, in San Francisco for a while, there was a lot of political pressure to really manage the finances of the organization, and in many cases that pressure was not as great if you were saying I was hiring a clinical person, and sometimes when hiring a clinical person, even if you were hiring them for a non-clinical role, was just not as heavily scrutinized as if you were hiring a generalist. So I found in that context it was really particularly challenging to actually get into particularly early and mid-career leadership roles. So if that's what you're referring to, I think I understand that. What I did find, ironically, and I don't know if this is still the case, is within the on the university side, not in the academic medical center, because I saw the same sort of things on the say like UCSF Health and Stanford Health, and those same things existed. But like in the UCSF School of Medicine and Stanford School of Medicine and in other organizations, if there were analysts or managerial roles, a lot of times generalists were probably better suited for those types of roles, and they were great spaces to get a lot of practical experience, so that you then had a better skill set and experience basis to be competitive for some of those other leadership roles. So I found that to be kind of a good bastion of places, but I think those are more like, again, analyst roles or early management roles. The other thing that's somewhat tricky about that is if you go onto those sites, looking at a role and seeing that the title is analyst, you might actually think it's about I'm just going to be sitting there kind of doing data analysis or financial analysis or whatever. But I told you my roles were analyst 2, 3, and 4. Those are all managerial roles. So if you don't do the homework to actually read the role and figure out what it is, you might actually miss opportunities for management opportunities that, again, set you up for successive layers of experience that will get you to a better place or to a place that you might be ultimately interested in getting to. So I say you got to do your homework and really try to seek out those opportunities. I do think that if what I described is similar to what you're seeing, part of that I think is really a push to make sure that, and I don't think this is a bad thing, although it does make it challenging for folks like us. There is a push to make sure that people who have clinical training and clinical backgrounds, that experience and that knowledge base does get elevated in the organizations, because oftentimes you have organizations where clinical skills and experiences are devalued to the point that they don't serve the organization well. One of the things I learned from the guy who hired me, the story I shared earlier, he was a physician leader, and he practiced, even running a $2 billion system, he still worked in the clinics on a weekly basis. And he found time to do that because he found that provided value to him and to the organization. So my philosophy is, when I hire clinical leaders, and I hire both clinical and non-clinical leaders, but when I hire clinical leaders, for the most part, it's almost a universal. There may be a few outliers, but almost a universal. I expect those clinical leaders to maintain some level of practice. because I think it gives you the credibility, first off, to lead those individuals who you're trying to lead. And secondarily, it brings that experience into the leadership discussion in ways that, because I didn't decide to be a doctor, I can't do. I can go and talk to doctors and say, okay, here's what I'm translating, but when you're the doctor who has to work with that EHR or work with that registration process or work with that patient discharge process, there's nothing more valuable than having that experience to inform we have broken systems or we have processes that we can improve. So I think it's a mix, and I think that there are opportunities and there are a lot of them. You do really have to work hard to consider, to the earlier point, whether you need to step back to get those skills and then pull yourself forward, because that clinical experience you aren't likely to want to go back and get. But the other part you can actually do. You can make yourself competitive.
2 more questions, then we'll break for networking and further questions.
Okay.
Good morning. I'm Linda Ellington. I'm a clinical services manager. I'm a nurse. And I have a question. So, you're on a career path, let's say. Your promotions are coming up. You're an internal candidate. And the promotion would be, it would be a next level leadership for you.
Okay.
And you know there's going to be a lot of competition, and the competition is going to be from people that have already done that role but want to do it now in your system. So as an internal candidate that's working but it's not quite there, how do you, like you said, project your work, know your work, how do you kind of sell yourself when you're not quite there?
You got to work your angles. This is good. So when you go for it, Linda. So thank you. It's a great question. It is a conundrum that a lot of us face in our careers. It's surprising to me, actually, that oftentimes people equate experience to expertise. They are not the same. There sometimes are reasons why people who have a certain role are seeking that exact same role in a different organization. Sometimes it's because they want to grow and they want to align themselves with a different organization to have that experience. Sometimes it's because that organization where they're currently doing that role has figured out that they're not that good at it. And they're trying to find another opportunity, which might actually be a better scenario for them, maybe a better situation, but they're trying to try it out, right? So if you are trying to get into a role that you haven't been in yet and you think, I'd say don't take the mindset that people outside of your organization have a competitive advantage to you. They do, in the sense that if they have that, they definitely have, let's give them the check for you've done the job. Whether or not you've done the job well remains to be seen. The check that you have that they don't is that you know the organization. So you know the processes. You don't have as steep a learning curve to figure out who the players are, how the culture of the organization works and or doesn't work, and what the opportunities are in a very sort of real way. So you have to work that angle of what do I know that would actually make me successful in this role, and then use that to try to leverage yourself. It may work, it may not work, but I think it's also you can also do your due diligence to figure out kind of what are the values of the organization. I think every organization worth its salt does 2 things. One, you do want to export talent in or import talent in so you can get practical experience that you don't have in your organization because you would kind of live in this incestuous world where you don't actually get to challenge your ideas as much. You can challenge them, but as much when you bring in people with different perspectives. But the other thing that really good organizations have is they train and develop people within their organization. So if you have produced value in the role that you're in, and you have shown the capacity for additional value for the organization, make that case that this is actually not just a benefit to you, but it's a benefit to the organization whoever's coming to replace you, or people elsewhere in the organization see this organization, in addition to bringing talent in, promotes from within. They develop talent within the organization. And if you can be an embodiment of that, great on the organization.
Can I just mention one point, though?
Sure, please.
If you don't get that role, then it's really important that you go to your leadership and ask what things you could do to expand your current role so that people can start to see you working or growing or moving. Don't use that negative as a way to lose sight of the great career trajectory that you could have in your organization. You sometimes don't know the politics behind why the other candidate was selected. It may not only be just experience, maybe they know about the market, or there's something else, an acquisition that's coming up, and this person, there may be other things that you don't know. So don't let the relationship with the current organization, as long as it's positive, be cut by the wayside of your hurt of not getting a role. Continue to push forward.
I agree. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'll add another point too. doing that, actually taking that lead, so obviously do it with the intention of getting the role, because you want the role. But if you can't get the role, you actually have accomplished something. In addition to what Adamika just mentioned, you've also put out the indication that I'm looking for more. I want to do more. Some cases that might be somewhat threatening to someone in your organization, and that's okay. That's your problem. Let them deal with that. But for other people, what they see is, okay, this person really is interested. Maybe I can find an opportunity to develop you. I can put you into a fellowship program. I can put you into additional training. I can help you to figure out what are the things that will make you more competitive the next time this opportunity comes up, either within this part of the organization or another part, because we want to keep talented individuals within the organization, and we want to grow them so that they are available to provide great value to the organization.
So we've got a little bit more time than I thought we had, so we can keep going. Some questions.
If you have to leave, though, don't
Right.
feel compelled to stay. But if you, I'm happy to go another 10 minutes or so.
Let's see, Jillian, and then we'll have.
Hey, Joe.
You guys know each other.
Yes, we do. Jillian Singer for everybody else. So you've moved in between the private and the public health systems quite a bit. So can you talk a little bit about your motivation and why you made those transitions?
I'm a repeat offender. Yeah, so thank you. Actually, I worked in public settings because I was born at a public hospital in Atlanta, and I really, like I said, was raised by a single mom of public housing, and public health care has always sort of resonated with me as a way to provide equity in our country, at least from a healthcare vantage point. So my sort of personal leanings have always been towards safety net organizations in terms of feeding my soul. When I went to work for Sutter, I was missing that aspect of my soul being fed, and I told my wife this, and she said, rich people need healthcare too. and it said, yes, that's true, but everybody wants to provide healthcare to them, so that's okay. Right? It doesn't have to be me. And then she also said, well, you should also recognize that while philosophically and emotionally or whatever, you still resonate with your childhood, obviously, and the people you serve who reflect that aspect of the world. She said, right now, you're more like the people you're serving at CPMC or Sutter. Like, let's be clear that I'm not like people in Back Heights. I'm not anywhere near that in terms of like wealth. I don't mean that in a negative way, because I would love your wealth, but I don't have it. But she said, you're more like that, more of them than the people that you currently serve or did serve in San Francisco. So it's just kind of like this perspective where I said, okay, well, I get it. Obviously, at some point, I wanted to come back to this, and when I made the decision, I had gotten at a stage in my career where I was reporting directly to the CEO of San Francisco General at the time, and through participating in events like this, I've been going to some like headhunter forums where we were learning about managing your career, talking to people like Afton, and really sort of gut checking what I was hearing, which was our field can be somewhat fickle and it can be somewhat lazy in the sense that if you haven't worked in certain settings, people assume that you can't work in those settings, right? So if you've only worked in a public setting and you go and try to do a leadership role in a not-for-profit or private setting, you're going to be like, you won't really understand how these things work, Or if you work in those settings and you try to work in a public setting, we're like, yeah, I don't think you'll be able to kind of like make it here because we're resource constrained and we're MacGyver types. We're working with bobby pins and bubblegum. So you won't like it here. And so people have said you need to manage your career. You need to actually have experience and exposure in many different settings so that you're not limited by people when they're going out and trying to fill a profile and they're going, yeah, you don't check this box, and so they kind of push you out right away. So I did it for that purpose, and let's be honest, Sutter is pretty darn good at what they do. They have some opportunity, to be clear, or to be sure. And I tell people that in public settings all the time who think that everything is pretty green on the other side. There's a lot of opportunities, but they were really good at sort of very type A management. And I said, well, I'm going to go learn from those individuals. And if I want to do this, great. I've proven I can, and I will stay there. But if I want to take that sort of mindset and then bring it back to a setting where I feel much more fully fulfilled, then I can do that as well. And so that's been part of the motivation for why I've bounced back and forth from academic to safety net to not-for-profit to safety net. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Holly Houston.
Hi.
I'm the Chief Healthcare Communications Officer at Styleetc Communications.
Ah.
I And I just graduated this year from UCSF from their healthcare administration and interprofessional leadership program.
Congratulations.
Thank you. My question is about value. You've repeated that word quite often this morning about proving your value, showing your value, and how do you define that value when you are a mentee looking for a mentor? It's easy to know what the mentor brings to the table, but what does the mentee bring to the table in order to compel the mentor to say yes?
Ah, this is great. So what you bring, the biggest thing you bring as a mentee is something that Efta mentioned earlier, the opportunity to pay it forward. So as a mentor, if you are willing to be a mentor at all, irrespective of if you're willing to mentor a specific individual, but if you have the disposition to be a mentor, you are actually looking for opportunities to help someone else. And this field is, by and large, that made up of individuals like that. Even if you're in healthcare management and not in healthcare services, healthcare is about helping people, right, at its core. And yes, there's a business aspect to this, whether you're on the supplier side or the consultant side, and that you are trying to actually get something to people who need it in their time of need. So I think that kind of mindset sort of exists, and in many cases it translates to people wanting to then take that and then have an opportunity to share the value of what they've gotten and the benefit that they've gotten from other people doing this with them with someone else. So the biggest thing you bring, which feels weird, is you're a vessel. I'm going to bring the opportunity for you to help me to advance my career. And quite honestly, there are mentors. Part of what the calculus you go through when you want to mentor somebody is like, is this person just kind of like winging this, because they're going to waste your time and they're not really committed to their career, or they're not committed to their own growth. You're spending more time thinking about what they are capable of doing than they are. Like, that's not good, right? So, but if they're really thoughtful about it, they do their homework, they're valuing your time, and you have the ability. So, like, somebody wanted to come to me and say, "Can you mentor me? I want to go into venture capital." I'd say, probably not a good fit, right? So you're saying, what if what I have to offer really could, if I see that really being of value to that individual. So I think that's the biggest thing you bring.
Can I do a quick follow-up?
Of course.
Again, with value.
Mm-hmm.
You have been so successful in such a short period of time. What do you see as your value that you have brought to these organizations in order to propel you so quickly and so high?
Wow, thank you. That's a good question. So I would say what I have brought and what I continue to bring. One is thinking about everything you do from what is the end goal, right? So oftentimes what we can do is when we get into these roles, we just think about doing the job, right? So and you do and I see this reflected in people's resumes. Like, people give you a resume, and the points in their resume for the job they did is the job description. Yeah. That's a bad resume. When you have a good resume, your resume says, there are active words in it. I aided the organization in creating X. I aided the organization in improving Y. And some of that is an actual tangible financial value, like I improved net revenue by 20% or by $2 million, or I found cost savings opportunities in the order of a couple $100,000, whatever it is the capacity of your role. I think what I bring to organizations and what I have done often is always thinking about, at the end of the day, am I making the organization make more than what they're paying me to actually do the job? So whether that, again, is revenue that I'm bringing in, or savings, cost savings, or value improvement that I'm bringing, that's all fiscal. But there are other non-fiscal opportunities too. Am I helping to advance causes? Am I helping to get us to a destination? Am I helping to promote a culture that actually is congruent with where the organization wants to go? So I think it's always thinking about that and looking between the lines of the specific job task to say, how is that moving forward an agenda for the organization? Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So I actually want to follow up on that, because if I look at your last 2 moves, each of those, there was a current crisis sort of in place. So you went to Harvard, there was a CMSD certification, I believe, that you had to come into. So I would add, part of that value is you solve immediate existential problems for the organization. What was the one here?
It's fiscal. well, it's sort of fiscal and operational, but mainly fiscal. We just acquired 2 new facilities and went live on a EHR system, and it kind of mucked up revenue cycle, and we were in some challenging straits financially.
Hi, Katie Abbott.
Hi, Katie.
Can you talk a little bit about your approach to building your team, and specifically how do you build your team with folks that have skill sets that are different from yours to ensure that you have diversity in looking at different problems and solutions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my fundamental philosophy for building a team is finding people who are smarter than me. And that's surprisingly easy to do, don't tell anybody. But it really is. I look for people who have sort of native expertise in whatever it is that we're doing. So if I know more about the law than our general counsel, then that's bad, right? If I know more about finances than my chief financial officer, not a good look, because I think I'm pretty decent, but I'm not. I wouldn't hire me as a CFO. I wouldn't hire me as a general counsel. So I look for people who wow me with their knowledge first and foremost. So I know you can do the job. Then I look for a cultural fit. So will you fit with the culture of the organization and the direction we're moving in? Will you fit with the dynamics of the team that I'm trying to put together? How does that sort of come into play to Joe's question earlier about I don't make people do personality assessments. I think I'm a pretty good judge of personality. And then later on when we're doing sort of development, we may do some of that stuff. But I'm going on gut from that vantage point. And then I'm checking references and other sorts of things too to validate that. But I think those are 2 of the biggest things that I look for. Are you talented? And then the third thing I would say is, are you willing to? Have you demonstrated value in the sense that it's easily discernible for me what you did in your last role that makes you capable of doing this job? And one of the things I look for is I do behavioral interviews, and I look for, have you gone against the grain at any point in your career? Have you made a tough decision that is really taking its toll on you, or was tough to do? Because I say to my team all the time, if we all agree, then one of us doesn't need to be here. So I don't expect that there is just natural or constant conflict. I think that's bad for an organization. But I think managed dissension is actually healthy, and that people should be empowered and encouraged to actually offer a different perspective to inform a decision. Now, once a decision is made, I don't think it's particularly healthy for people to stay in their corner, or to feel like, oh, I don't own that because I didn't agree with it. That's also not okay. So invite healthy dissension. Invite people to be critical thinkers and to be willing to share those things. And actually, you have to be good at what you do. Does that answer your question? Okay. Any more? I'm going to wear you guys out. You're like, geez, shut up, man. It's not good. All right. So maybe we'll make this the last question, because I think it's really, there's a lot of benefit to you all networking with each other too, and I don't want to steal that from you while you're here together. Yes, sir.
So Sam, so building on team.
Sam, can you keep the mic closer? Very suave voice, but I can't hear you.
Building on the team dynamic you're talking about. So I know for me, one of the things that I figure out is how to shift from actually doing the work to focusing more on the second time. And I have no idea if you do that or not. How do you do that? How do you sort of learn to set it up?
So it's interesting. It's great. So Sam, it occurs to all of us. I think when you make that shift from the scale is tipping from you doing less of doing the work than enabling the work and setting the tone, and that feels risky because you have built your career on, I'm pretty darn good at doing this, and so it's kind of like, well, why would I let that go? Because to our earlier point, that's the value I offer. But if you're in a role where the value that's expected of you is to set the tone, then you've got to really start to question and challenge your ability to do that well. So I say you actually have to try and get feedback. This I actually think is really important. Get feedback from those people you're leading. Is this working for you? I'm trying to convey a goal for the organization or direction for this team. Does it resonate with you? Am I giving you the tools that you need to get it done? Give me constructive feedback. You have to be open to that, and it's very scary to do because depending on how well you've cultivated a esprit of respect you know, if you haven't done that well, it could run amok, right? People are like, you know what, you're really bad at this. You know, you don't speak to us. You stay in your office all day. You send very terse missives out. They aren't very helpful. And quite honestly, I actually don't think you know what you're doing. You know, I mean, you know, you could get that kind of feedback, and quite honestly, if that's who you are, you probably need that type of a really gut check, right? Not to say you personally, Sam, but I'm saying as a leader, if that's who you are, that's actually very valuable. It would be scary as all get out, but better to get it then than to get to a point in your career. And I've seen this, unfortunately. People get to very senior levels and they haven't had the benefit of getting feedback either from people who they report to help them to grow, or taking the liberty of getting that type of candid feedback from people who they are leading. And like I said, leadership from Tom Atchison is about people subjugating their own right to self-determination to follow your lead because you can get them to a direction they can't get to themselves. If they feel like they can get to a place that you've gotten into or further than you've gotten into by themselves, you know, here's leadership. You're here, you're over here, they're up here. They're going in this direction. And so I think it's really important. Now, so one quick story I learned early in my career is I was running a small division. I had this guy who worked for me, and I actually, you know, he was already working there when I was hired, and so he's reporting to me, and I sort of had framed my mind around his capabilities based off of the work product that he was producing, and it wasn't that glowing. I thought, oh, this guy's not that good. You know, I'll work with him, but then occasionally he would hit the ball out of the park, like really do really well. And I was like, this is odd. Like, you know, what is it? It's a Jekyll and Hyde thing. So I sat down with him one day and I said, you know, why do you do this? Like, I want to give you this feedback. Like, this is excellent. This exact same thing, you know, 2 weeks later you did, and it's full of errors, or it was just, it took you way longer than it did. Why is that? And I kid you not, the person actually said to me, well, sometimes I feel like doing the work and sometimes I don't. And I was like, what? I was like, what did you just say to me? Right? So I was like, that's very interesting. I was like, how would you feel if I said, sometimes I feel like signing your time card and sometimes I don't? You know, that, like, really it was that. And I was like, let me just put it like this. I said, I really thought that you weren't capable of doing this type of work. And that actually didn't bode well for you from a long-term perspective. Let me be clear about that. But now I know you can. And now I know it's just a matter of you actually, like, wanting to do it and knowing that that's an expectation. So let me be very clear. This is the expectation. When you do this, this is not. And you do more of this, and this doesn't bode well for you. You do more of this bodes well for you. Not only did he do more of that, in that, before I got promoted, which was in that year, he actually got promoted to a different role in another part of the organization. Because he woke up and said, oh my gosh, I can actually manage my career and I can do this. He was relatively young, but I was younger than he was. And so I think it was part of the dynamic there where it's like, who do you think you are kind of a deal? And that's okay. You can work through those things. But he really did rise to the occasion. And fortunately, he went on to do greater things. I was really excited for him. And it boded well for me because other people who came to work with me were like, hey, he got to there. Did you help with that? And I'm like, not really. I just told him to do his job. And he did. You know? But if that's helpful for you, I'm happy to provide it. And if you're that good, then let's do this. Does that help you, Sam?
So that was being comfortable with the crucial conversation.
Yeah, you got to have it. You don't have it, and it doesn't serve them well, and it doesn't serve you well.
All right. So make sure and fill out your evaluations, leave them on the table, and thank you.
Thank you.